Now, mai haere mai, thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedule to come and mix and mingle. That's the most important thing, and to spend a few minutes listening to me. And I hope you might have some questions or comments about some of the things I'm going to share with you. When I was first approached to speak to this postgraduate mix and mingle, I was pretty much given free rein, you know, speak whatever you like about. And I thought, okay, well, if you ask an academic that's been around for a while to speak on something relevant to postgraduate students, the topic I chose was to reflect on the postgraduate journey. And that's also a bit dangerous, because when we look back, and it was 20 years ago that I did my PhD, and over time your perceptions change, and there tends to be a little bit like conversations I overhear my wife have with other women who've had children. They tend to kind of have a slightly competitive aspect to how tough childbirth was for them. And there's a similar kind of setup that goes on with reflecting on your own PhD journey. But I'm not going to bore you senseless with telling you about how tough it was and how you've got it so easy and so on. What I am going to do is to try, I hope, to give you some insights and reflections that might be relevant to some of the things that you've either experienced or perhaps are experiencing or may experience in this journey of postgraduate research. It is a long and winding road. I have not met any postgraduate student, and I've not supervised any postgraduate student who's had something that has happened smoothly, easily, and without any drama along the way. If you have that experience, that's fantastic. But most worthwhile things in life, most difficult things, have those turns and have those bumps and have those challenges. And that's what makes them worthwhile. So when you are struggling with things to do with your work, just remember that those struggles are an inherent part of what makes it worthwhile to be doing what you're doing. Not everybody gets a master's or a PhD or a Doctor of Health Science or an EDD. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's challenging. What I have learned is that actually the essential ingredient of success on this journey is not the intellectual capacity of the student. All of you have that already, or else you wouldn't have been admitted into the program in the first place. The essential ingredient is actually the determination and the tenacity of the student involved, because that's what's important in overcoming some of the obstacles and some of the challenges that you face. 20 years ago, when I was doing my PhD at the University of Queensland in Australia, I'm a Kiwi, but I was lucky enough to go across the ditch and do my PhD there. The most popular t-shirt on campus, which was worn by graduate students doing the things that you're doing right now, had in very emblazoned and boldened letters written across its back, "Don't ask me about my effing thesis!" exclamation mark. And that was quite a in-your-face expression of some of the difficulties and some of the aspects to do with doing research and trying to write it up in something that's going to be examined in a thing called a thesis. Now, some of you may be doing creative works, but for the great majority, it'll be involved in the production of this body of knowledge that you've contributed to in this thing called a thesis. And of course, trying to explain that to anybody else, including your parents or cousins or siblings or friends or partners who might ask you, what are you actually doing for your doctorate? It's not an easy thing either. Another thing that I remember very vividly about my time doing my PhD is my supervisor. And again, there are lots of stories that you can hear, a lot of them horror stories about the relationship between students and their supervisor or supervisors. But I was extremely fortunate in that I had a really straight-talking Aussie who was my supervisor. And it was 20 years ago, but ingrained in my memory are a couple of the things that he gave me as feedback on my thesis draft. One of them was, written in very bold letters in the margin, "If I have to read this lot one more time, I think I'll puke," is what he said. Another one was, because I was back here, I came back home to New Zealand to write up the thesis. And another one was, because he knows that I'm a surfer, I love getting out there and surfing, and he said, "That frigid New Zealand surf must be getting to your brain. This is crap." So, you know, that's another part of the learning process, isn't it? It's hard not to take it personally when this is something you've invested a lot of time in and you've given it your absolute best, and the person who you respect and is giving you kind of the quality assurance that you're needing to get through to the process is slamming you like that. And that's why it's ingrained on my memory. And perhaps you will have similar kinds of experiences. What's important to recognise in that context is that peer review can be quite brutal, but it's actually an essential part of the quality assurance process for science and for academia and for you as postgraduate research students as well. So try to take the wisdom from those comments and to reflect and to utilise them to improve both your understanding and the work that you're going to present. So that these people, including examiners at the end, are giving you that kind of critique, not because they want to slam you down and make you feel small and inadequate. They're doing it because they want you to rise and to take that advice and that criticism and to reflect on it, to think about it, and perhaps even to counter it and reject it, or to refine and improve your work. So that's a critical part of this journey as well. A couple of other things that are, and not only did I do my PhD a long time ago, but since that time I've had the privilege of supervising quite a range of students and a range of projects. And in preparing for speaking to you this evening, I just listed down some of those things that have happened over the last 2 decades. And I'd call these perhaps bumps and twists in the road. Not that they were necessarily negative, but they were things that were challenging at the time and on reflection have been ones that have certainly shaped the journey for those students. And almost all of these things are actually not related to the research or the thesis, because you're doing this postgraduate research thing, but life happens as well, right? It's not something you can park and put aside. And so life happens, and with life comes all kinds of things that are unexpected. So I've had 4 students who have fallen pregnant and had babies while they've been doing their theses. In fact, I have a current PhD student who I just got an email from yesterday. She had her first baby 1.5 years ago, and she's due to have another one later this year. So that's fantastic, but I keep telling my students, stop having sex, you know. This is something that is actually not that scary. From a supervisor point of view, you'd think, oh my goodness. And naturally, you prioritise your child, you prioritise your family, as you absolutely should. And so what does that mean for the thesis? In all 4 situations, it's actually been an extremely beneficial bump in the road, or bump in the body, if you like. And for this one student, what was interesting for her is something completely unexpected happened. She was doing research in the Philippines in very remote fishing communities. And in accessing the people to interview them in the focus groups, she found very quickly, as a young woman, the questions came very quickly about whether she was married or not. And secondly, if she had any children. And this was something that was expected from a woman of her age, that if she wasn't married, and she was, and that helped in some way settle the acceptance of her into that community. But she also, when she explained to them that she was pregnant and divulged that, it suddenly opened an enormous empathy connection with that local community. And eventually, when she took her newborn son with her to her study sites, it meant that there was this enormous bonding connection opportunity that happened as a consequence of life happening to her, that actually added great value to her research. So this is another thing I wanted to share with you as a reflection, is that, and I suppose it's true for many things in life, there are calamities, changes, dramas, accidents that happen, and you think, oh my goodness, how am I going to get through this? And actually, after you've got through it and you look back on it, you realise what opportunity that provided you, what door it opened, or what path you went down that you never would have if you hadn't had that challenge face you. So that's something I wanted to share with you too. I've had students who have had deaths in their families, mothers, brothers, and that's been a difficulty as well and a tragedy. And there have been tears, and there have been timeouts, as there should be in those kinds of situations. And there have been some really moving tributes from the student in their graduation, in private ceremonies that they've had, in their acknowledgements pages, which are always such an enormous privilege to write, as a tribute to those who've been with you on the journey. And that's another thing I wanted to share with you this evening, is that you might feel that this journey is yours. And postgraduate research can be quite a lonely exercise at times. Most of you won't have large cohorts of classes or a lab with lab mates doing the same thing. Most of you will be doing a piece of research that, at the very best, maybe your supervisor and a few others might understand. And perhaps your supervisor might not understand. It might be something that you're just doing yourself. But there are people who love you and care for you and who are involved in your life, who, even though they might not understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, they're on the journey with you and they're supporting you with it. And so that's really important, that you continue to try and include them and to acknowledge them as part of that journey. They're incredibly important supporters for you, and they take an enormous amount of pride in what you're doing and what you achieve. And you see that at every graduation ceremony, and you probably don't see it right in the middle of the journey. So, keep that in mind. Relationship issues. Often relationships end up sacrificed at the altar of a thesis or some other kind of endeavour. And this is something that I've seen happen in students, and it happened to me during my PhD. So that's kind of I suppose, a word of warning, is that yes, it takes focus, yes, it takes sacrifice and dedication to achieve this ambition, this worthy ambition that you have. But some of the things that are more important in life are not worth sacrificing. So be very cognizant of the need to take time out. The time out for you to recharge the batteries, and also for the people who are important in your lives. Because, as I said, they're on the journey with you, whether you realise it or not. We've had practical issues with students, with permits being revoked and permissions and approvals not being given, and changes happening. There have been the inevitable challenges associated with money. And I could tell you stories about the things I had to do as a postgraduate student to try and eat, to try and pay the rent, to try and fix a car that had broken down, or continue on with work that I knew I had to do but had no idea how I was going to make it work financially. And that is a significant challenge. It is one of those major bumps or curves in the journey. And it is something that you just have to try and work your way through. And somehow, in my experience anyway, I made it happen. And somehow, with the help sometimes of others, my students have made it happen in a variety of different ways. It's just one of those challenges that you have to try and meet. What else have I got on my list? Accidents and injuries, those have happened too. Fortunately, nothing absolutely tragic or permanent, but there have been numerous kind of bumps and bruises, physically, not just mentally, or not just figuratively along the way. Confidence crises, those have happened too, and it may have happened to you or it may not. It's great if it doesn't, but it's quite frequent that at various stages you'll just think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I can't do this, I have no idea if I'm going to get there, or it's beyond me. Be aware that this is a purely natural reaction to any kind of difficult challenge that has a long time frame. So the confidence crisis is something that if you expect it, I'm not saying look for it, but if it happens, try not to let it completely spook you too much. This is when you can use your colleagues, fellow students, people you trust and respect to recharge that battery for you. Jump to a sort of piece of advice that I've got at the end. One of the things that I've learned, not just through the journey in terms of postgraduate research, but in other times when the battery's been pretty flat, it's advice that was given to me, and so I pass it on to you for what it's worth, is that, all of us have a happy place, something that we like to do, or a place or music or people we like to be with. These are things that you should know are important for you in terms of recreating yourself. So that's where recreation comes from, the root of the word. So recharging the batteries. For me, it's surfing and getting out on the water. For some, it's going and listening to opera. For others, it's painting. For others, it might be reading poetry or going for a walk in the forest or mountain, whatever it is that squeals your tires and recharges your batteries. Know that and revisit it frequently. Because it's okay, despite what your supervisors might tell you, it's okay to take some time out every now and again. And if they give you a hard time, tell them to come and talk to me and I'll have a little counselling session with them about supervision. Oh, another thing I've got on my list is a common thing, and this is a student of mine I'm currently struggling with, is the I need more data syndrome. There is a paranoia about not having enough, and there's this kind of esoteric objective, particularly around a doctorate, of making a significant contribution to new knowledge. And so there's this, oh my gosh, I have to somehow do something that's going to change the world. And you're not after a Nobel Prize here. You know, it's okay to do something that is just enough. And so there is a law of diminishing returns that applies with regard to data collection. And I think in some ways, certainly some of my students, the reasons that they've wanted to continue to collect more and more data is because actually that's the fun part. My students are out there doing things like, you know, watching dolphins and whales and scuba diving, and so it's fun doing the field work. And stopping that, putting the line in the sand, if you like, and moving on to actually data analysis and write-up is not that much fun. And so there's this temptation to want to do more. So again, take the advice from your supervision team and from others as well. It's okay to go and talk to other people outside of your supervision team about when enough is enough. Analysis paralysis, another common thing. So this is, I've just got to keep analysing these data because, you know, it's not throwing up anything of significance, and so I'm going to do more and more. Again, there is a point of diminishing returns here, and you may not find earth-shattering results. You may actually not achieve the ambitious objectives that you had when you started on the journey. But actually that's okay, because what you are doing is not just finding out something through research. What you are doing is training yourself and developing your skills as a researcher. Okay, that's quite an important thing that most students at this stage of postgraduate research study don't actually understand. And I don't want to trivialise it by saying it's sort of a training exercise, but it certainly is about developing your ability as a researcher. And yes, it's great to find out important things through that research exercise, but the skill that will take you forward and add more value to not only your own lives, but your future careers and others that you work with, are your abilities as a researcher. What I found out in my PhD 20 years ago has very little significance today, but what I learned as a researcher still applies to what I do in terms of advising other researchers and my own research itself. So that's something to think about too. Writing dramas, of course, you know, writer's block's a pretty common thing, and that's not unusual. And again, there are different ways that people accomplish good writing. I always find that it's helpful to have a good space and a good time block to do that. It's different for each of you, but learning what gets the best out of you in terms of writing is important. What I do think generally applies is that being able to pick half an hour there and an hour and a half there and trying to write a thesis is a very, very difficult recipe. Having significant time blocks where you can dedicate and focus and concentrate just on writing is where you're able to make the most progress forward. So that would be something I would advise you, is to try everything you can when it comes to the writing side, to block out days in your schedule to be able to focus just on writing. Because doing it in bits and pieces and dribs and drabs is a very, very difficult way to try and make progress. What else have I got on my list here? Oh, balancing other obligations, and of course, you know, most of us have to work to make a living, and we have other things that we're involved with in our lives. At some point, the thesis does need to come first, and even though I've mentioned before, you know, your loved ones and people are important, those relationships are critical. But there are going to be times when the thesis and what you are trying to achieve needs to take precedence over them. But have the conversation with them first, so that they understand and that they sign on and support that this is okay. You know, that you are not going to be available for them as the highest priority over this particular time period, because this is when your thesis is number one in your life. It's not forever. It's just for a limited period. And if you can get them to support you in that, that's awesome. If it just is something that erodes away and kind of creeps behind the scenes and is unspoken and something which is not explicit and agreed upon, that's when you can have major challenges. The last one on my little list here is something that perhaps you might not have even thought about yet, because there's an expectation that when you come to present your thesis for examination, and especially when you get the great result at the end, there'll be this enormous euphoria. Oh my God, it's over. You know, yahoo, it's done. And yes, that may happen for you, and I hope it does, and it's certainly worthy of celebration. But the thing that I want to share with you is that there is something that occurs quite naturally, and this is true for anything in life where you've been looking towards this distant horizon for years and years and working really, really hard to achieve a certain goal or aim. What follows the euphoric feeling and celebration of achievement of that worthy aim is a natural kind of decline in mood. I call it the post-thesis blues. It's sort of this, oh my God, I've done it. What the hell else to do with my life, you know? There's this thing that's kind of defined me for so long and that I've focused on for so long, and suddenly it's actually now behind me. And so that is a very natural kind of reaction, and I think sort of forewarned is forearmed a little bit. If you understand that you're likely to, and not everybody has this experience, but it is quite common, that you're likely to have this kind of potential down period in terms of your mood and feeling after that. I mean, it's not postnatal depression, but it's, you know, it's perhaps a similar kind of thing. It's not hormonal to the same degree, but it is something which is worthwhile thinking about as to this is something that can happen. Okay, got to finish off with a couple of other quick reflections on you about lessons learned, some of which I've already mentioned. The KISS principle, keep it simple. Even simple questions and simple research activities that seem kind of elementary at the beginning end up being enormously complicated. So this is something I coach my students on all the time, and colleagues I mentor, is that, you know, keep it clear, simple, straightforward. This isn't a Nobel Prize exercise. I mean, if you can win a Nobel Prize out of your doctorate or your master's thesis, awesome, fantastic. But for most of us, that's not the case. So keep it simple. Take your time out. Make sure that you have time and ability to focus. Remember, it's fun. You know, have fun during it. Laugh at yourself. Realise you're going to make mistakes. Realise that things are going to go wrong. Hang with your mates. That's been pretty important for me. I mean, I know that's a real Kiwi colloquial expression, but you know, having your friends and having the ability to go out, have a good time, and just get your head completely out of this postgraduate research thing is important for you, to realise that there is life outside of the university environment and what you're trying to achieve. And when you get to the end, stick a fork in it when it's done. You know, sometimes it's kind of, you're so paranoid about handing this thing in because it's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect thesis. There will be a point where you're going to have to let it go, and you're going to have to put it in for examination, and that's a nerve-wracking thing to do. But you know, there comes a point where it's done, and you've got to let it go and realise that it isn't going to be perfect, and then you move into that examination process. My final message, when I've sort of prepared for this and thank you for the opportunity to reflect on this, by the way. It's been quite interesting and healthy for me to reflect on sort of my own journey, and then 20 years of sharing in other people's journeys in this endeavour. What I've learned more than anything out of this is that, and it's a cliche, I know, but the journey is actually much more important than the destination. And also, related to that, the learning is actually much more important than the qualification. So when I look back on having these letters after my name, yes, I'm proud of them, but actually they're just that, they're only letters after my name. What's most significant in terms of the journey I've been on is actually what I've learned along the way and how it's shaped my knowledge, understanding of the world around me, and my ability to engage in this thing called research, which I still find fascinating and I'm still passionate about today, you know, 20 years later. So I sincerely hope that you can have a similar kind of experience. Every single journey is different, But thank you for the opportunity to reflect on mine, and I hope it's given you at least some insight that's relevant to what you're doing. Thanks very much.